To get some reaction right now from the Cato Institute. Cato Institute senior fellow Dan Mitchell is with us right now. And Dan, you don't think any of this goes anywhere?
A giant tax cut at the same time that there's no effort to control government spending. I mean, I love the tax policy, at least most of it. I don't like the special child deduction. I think that'll raise child care costs, make the code more complex. But lowering corporate tax rates, that's hugely important for the economy's competitiveness. If we can lower the small business tax rate, heck, I'm going to reclassify myself as a contractor to Cato and have a lower rate myself. I'd love that as well. But we have a government that is too big right now and is projected to grow faster than the private sector for the next 10 years, for the next 50 years. And unless Trump is willing and unless Republicans in Congress are willing to control spending, but they're not. You see what they're doing on this spending bill. They're both agreeing. We'll spend more money on Obamacare. We get more spending on defense. That doesn't add up in the long run.
Isn't the idea for this just to kick off growth, and they're going to look at tax reform later on, things that they could actually implement on the budget side that you're talking about? Here they're saying, listen, we just want to start growth. We have had nothing, and we need to get something through, even if it's temporary. So isn't that the idea behind this?
There's no question we've had a horrible 21st century so far, averaging less than 2% growth. Historically, we've averaged 3% growth. If we can dramatically lower the corporate tax rate and get some of the other provisions in there, yes, the economy can grow faster, but will it be sustainable? I mean, will it even be enacted into law? If members of Congress, at least the serious ones, and there are one or two, if they're looking at a proposal saying, okay, multi-trillion-dollar tax cuts, at the same time we're doing big spending increases, and who knows what Trump's going to do on infrastructure and things like that. I'm not someone who goes to sleep fretting about budget deficits, but even I, in the long run, agree that you can't get too far out of whack because sooner or later you become grease, and in the long run, that's where we're heading anyhow if we don't reform entitlements.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that we get, particularly on the corporate rate and the pass-through rate, which is the Trump proposal to 15%, does that happen this year?
I think a lower corporate tax rate probably will happen because it is such a cancer on our economy. The average corporate tax rate in Europe is under 20%, and we're at 39% when you add in state corporate taxes in addition to the 35% federal. That is something we have to fix. If you lower the pass-through rate to 15%, the revenue implications to that are enormous. And I love tax cuts. I just don't think Congress will do it unless there's also something on spending.
It's $1 trillion in additional revenue loss that Congress would have to come up with somewhere.
And they can't do that through reconciliation because that would put it at the 10-year over the deficit. It would increase the deficit. So what are your views on how best to pay for this? What is a way that they can increase revenue to try to set this $1 trillion tax cut off?
Well, I'm all in favor of getting rid of some of the loopholes in the tax code, like the state and local tax deduction. That would terrify people in New York City.
And we don't, that's right. And the property tax deduction is going to terrify lots of people throughout.
But it would be good to get rid of that loophole because that would force state and local governments to be more responsible. But the real key thing, from my perspective, is controlling government spending. When CBO came out with their new numbers a month or so ago, I did the calculations. If you simply limit the annual growth of government spending to 1.96% a year, about the rate of inflation, you can not only balance the budget in 10 years, but also have a $3 trillion tax cut on a static basis.
That means you have to touch Social Security and Medicare, and then you have to touch the entitlements. Is that where you're going?
You probably don't need to touch Social Security, but you would need to touch Medicare and Medicaid.
Yes.
But we have to do that anyhow. Otherwise, hello, France, hello, Italy. That's where we're heading.
Yeah, so there's no border adjustment tax in this. We're not expecting the president to endorse a border adjustment tax.
Well, I hope not, because I've always not looked at the BAT as a pre-VAT, a value-added tax.
Right.
I don't want us to go down that path of giving Washington a new source of revenue.
Okay, but you're saying you need to control spending, maybe control spending, but do you want to also raise revenue? No.
I want to get rid of various deductions and loopholes and preferences in the code, but I don't view a BAT as a way of doing that. I view getting rid of the health care exclusion, the state and local tax deduction, the ethanol and wind energy credits. So that's the really corrupt stuff that gives us this 76,000-page monstrosity of a tax code.
They are essentially government handouts to special interests. Yeah. And that's what you're, it's again, you want to broaden the base. Some people, if you you could do true tax reform, broaden the base. Some people will end up paying more taxes, but you simplify it overall and you make it more fair.
Every deduction has a lobbying group.
Yeah, that's true. Well, here's the problem. The government is going to extract $3.5 trillion from families and businesses this year, 18% of the GDP. Where's all that money going, and why are big companies and special interests benefiting?
And why are we financing, on top of that $3.5 trillion of tax, why are we financing a $4 trillion plus government spending, most of which is not consistent with what our founding fathers had in mind?
So just to be clear, Dan, you're saying we're going to get the president's details today on his basic priorities for a tax plan, but you don't think it goes anywhere because Congress is never going to agree to cutting all these taxes and not cutting spending.
I think that the lower corporate tax rate is the most important part of Trump's plan, and I think that's the part that's the most realistic. I think beyond that, it gets very difficult without some spending restraint.
All right, we'll leave it there. Dan, great to see you. Thanks so much for your reaction. Dan Mitchell from Cato.